and join with me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Roll call, please.
Chair West?
Yes.
Director Bennett? Director Aranio?
Here.
Director Perello?
Here.
Director Borchard?
Here.
I noticed earlier I saw alternate Andy Waters back there. Any other alternates I can't see from here? Stand up and wave. All right, moving on. Agenda review. Are there any additions, changes, or to the? No changes. Okay, next we'll move on to a public comment. This is an opportunity for members of the public to address the board on matters not otherwise on today's agenda. However, be advised, because of the number and complexity of matters on today's agenda and the closed session to follow, public comment will be limited to 3 minutes per person. So with that, if you care to address the board, step forward, identify yourself, and use your 3 minutes wisely.
Okay, timer starts now. Good afternoon, Chairman. Andy Waters, Los Postos Users Group Chair. Just a small report from this morning's meeting that we had. We had great attendance. We had a few items on there. One was a well permit that Crestview has proposed. We looked through it, and it's standard for replacement well. There was some homeowners that showed up at the meeting that were very lively in their discussion about why they didn't want the well in their neighborhood. And I don't think it concerns this board at this time, but that was our consensus moving forward. We talked extensively about the new reporting requirements for taking pictures of the wells every 6 months or whatever. And I think staff was there and you got a good flavor, and Kathleen, wherever she is, right there, got a good flavor of the frustration that we have as far as the communications on when, how, and who to report to. And I think we gave some good direction, or at least good flavor of what was going on there in today's meeting. So we're looking forward to having another meeting before the next GMA. If there's anything that we can put on the agenda to help you guys out, we'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie.
Jennifer Trebo, City of Ventura. The City of Ventura appreciates the board's commitment to implementing an allocation ordinance that is clear, effective, and enforceable. And we support staff's efforts to resolve the Santa Clara River Flex allocation issues. However, it's our understanding that the board intended to implement the ordinance by October 1st, 2019. Recent communications with staff indicates that following the July 15th executive committee meeting, there's no longer a timeline for ordinance implementation. The city encourages the board to direct staff to work to resolve the remaining allocation issues and schedule a follow-up executive committee meeting in August so that progress on the allocation ordinance can continue and emergency ordinance E can be replaced by October 1st, 2019. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Christine Cohen, and I reside at 69 La Patera Drive in Camarillo, across the street from the proposed well 7, for which your executive director is being asked to grant approval, water well permit number 0284. This application, submitted by Crestview Mutual Water Company, a nonprofit mutual water company, was on the agenda for the ALPA group this morning. What I would like to let this body know is that this water company has been less than forthcoming on providing accurate and timely information to its shareholders. Let me be clear, this is not just a matter about a well that the Crestview claims will not extract more water than currently allocated to its service area. This is about a water company that bought a piece of property in an upscale residential neighborhood, which came with covenants, conditions, and restrictions. The Los Postos Hills Owners Association has denied approval of this proposed well project on multiple grounds of violating our CCNRs, including a provision prohibiting drilling any wells. The selected well site is completely enveloped within state-mandated setbacks from individual sewage disposal systems, surface water drainages, and sensitive habitat. Using existing public county records along with GPS technology, a simple analysis to locate septic tanks and seepage pits can be conducted. Existing seepage pits are shown in the exhibit, along with a 150-foot halo surrounding the seepage pit locations. The halos depicted in Exhibit A, the handout, were drawn at 145 feet to account for margin of error in plotting the seepage pit locations. The proposed well locations on 191 Alviso does not meet the minimum 150-foot setback from a potential contamination source. A discretionary variance to the standards for county and state agencies is unprecedented in recent decades for public supply wells, regardless of well design. Given the sandy nature of the soils in the area, deep annular seals, which are known to be limited in their impediment to pathogens, are likely to be ineffective. The well drilling permit application prepared by the applicant fails to indicate the location of required septic and other features and does not comply with the state standards. The proposed well project backs up to what historically was a blue line creek, a natural creek which the applicant's drainage study refers to as an open swale. Unfortunately, drill sludge, startup, and discharge water will be flowing down this creek bed. This creek bed is privately owned by each property owner along the creek. No permissions have been sought to discharge drill sludge or anything else on each private property owner's lot. According to the Homeowners Association, the flow easement is owned by the association. No application for variance has been submitted to the Homeowners Association either. Given the natural topography and orientation of the parcel, significant grading would be required to render the property safe enough to orient drill rig capable of reaching the proposed depths and diameters of the drilling.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen. Your 3 minutes are up.
I would like to submit my comments in their entirety for you.
Feel free. Anyone else? Seeing none, we will move on to board comments. Comments by members of the board? I have just one. It has, in discussing future water, surplus water supplies with United, it appears that there's a good chance that there'll be a large volume of additional surplus water available sometime around the end of the year, December or January. When and if the water becomes available, there'll be a limited opportunity to seize that water. And while staff will inevitably explore options with respect to grants and means of funding the acquisition of any additional water, this may also be an opportunity. I know at the time, a couple of months ago, when we set forth we went down the road and we obtained that additional 15,000 acre feet of water through United, there were some folks that expressed some interest in doing something along those same lines. And if you are interested, since the GMA may not be in a position to acquire any of that surplus water, if your city or your ranch, your entity is interested in directly acquiring some of that surplus water if it's available, my suggestion is you contact GMA staff. GMA staff and United are planning to work together to develop a program that will facilitate that if that water becomes available. The pricing is expected. The pricing comes through United. It's got nothing to do with the GMA, but the GMA's involvement is intended primarily to facilitate the availability of that water and then to account for that water going forward in coordination with an allocation plan. So if you're interested in doing that, contact GMA staff. Anyone else? Yes.
Yes. How do you turn? Thank you. Thank you. Hello, I'm here as the alternate for Ms. Charlotte Craven, the council member from Camarillo. I would like to make a couple of comments. Number one, I would like to publicly apologize to Mr. Barata, the county council. I did not see an email that he had sent me, and I was complaining about it. And if you're big enough to complain, you're big enough to apologize. So, Mr. Barata, apologize. I want to thank Mr. Shepard and the body for sending him to Oxnard to help bring me up to speed on the item. And with this, the last public comment, I have not followed this issue. This is the first that I've heard about it. I'd like to get a copy of her comments, and I'm wondering if we can agendize this for a future meeting to consider. And the last thing is a question coming from the city that I represent, the city of Oxnard. And I sit here as a member representing Moore Park, Camarillo, Ventura, Oxnard, and Port Hueneme. There is an item on closed session having to do with the Las Posas Valley Water Rights Coalition versus Fox Canyon Groundwater. And I'm wondering, is there going to be a conflict for not possibly myself, but for anybody else going into closed session on this matter? Those are my comments. Thank you.
First, with respect to conflicts involving closed session, if there are any, that'll be discussed in closed session. Not something we would discuss at this level of the meeting. And personally, I don't see the point in agendizing anything having to do with well permits, since this agency has nothing to do with granting well permits. So something we can, I guess I'd suggest you take up with staff if they think it's appropriate and want to put it on the calendar. That's up to them, but beyond that.
As a board member, can I request that staff be directed to address the speakers?
Today?
Yeah.
No.
I mean, not today, but in the future? In the future for possibly as you'd recommended?
During public comment?
No, not during public.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
As you recommended that possibly staff could address this issue in a future meeting at some time. Can I request that staff does do that?
I prefer instead that you confer with staff to see whether it's an issue over which this agency has any jurisdiction. If the answer is no, it's a waste of my time.
Okay.
If the answer is yes, then by all means, bring it back.
Thank you.
All right, moving, any other?
Yeah, I have one comment. As one of the people that helped make the motion for the purchase of the funding to United for the purchase of the state water, my understanding is United hasn't actually purchased that water yet. Am I correct with that?
We had pre-purchased the water last winter and brought it into Lake Piru. We purchased 15,000 acre feet of water back in December and January and had that brought in at that time, and it's been held in our lake.
Well, what was presented to us was there's this one-time opportunity to purchase this water, and we need to do it right now, and we only had days to be able to make that decision. We made that decision. My feeling was it was because we were going to buy additional water. And it wasn't to just put $3 million into United's coffers to pay for water United had purchased, previously. That was never mentioned. So my understanding is United still has the possibility to purchase water now, or I'm sorry, coming up in the fall. But I will be very disappointed and will speak strongly about it if, in fact, United didn't take the money that we gave them to go out and actually buy additional water, but instead just said, oh, we're going to pay ourselves back for pre-purchasing water. Particularly when that wasn't presented to us at all. So I don't know where United stands on that. I've heard conflicting things. United is considering buying more, but if they aren't, I feel like we got hit with an urgency vote without a fair presentation about how the money was going to be used, because it was like United doesn't have the money, we can't afford to do this, we need the money. Now, we gave United the money, and United didn't buy the state water. United says, oh, we're going to release some other water that we had purchased 6 months earlier. Well, United had the money to purchase that water. So if United would have had the money, I wouldn't have suggested we use Fox Canyon. We're going to have a ton of things, as we see and hear, that we need to do, and I wouldn't have done it that way. So anyway, I want to go on record. I think that I'd like to hear more information, but I'd like to hear a presentation about is United going to buy the water? Are they going to buy $15 million worth of water? Do you know?
We're not going to buy $15 million worth of water, but I don't see any reason why.
How much money did we authorize?
$3 million.
$3 million, that's what I
3
meant.
million, 15,000 acre feet.
15,000 acre feet worth of water, I'm sorry.
And yes, if Article 21 water becomes available again, we certainly will be back in the market again now that we have that funding in order to purchase an additional amount.
Well,
You got, basically, here's the bottom line. You paid $3 million for 15,000 acre feet, and about 24,000 acre feet will be delivered. So you got more than your money's worth.
That's all well and good. It's not about that. It's not about that. It's about how the issue was presented. United needed $3 million so that they could buy that state water. And United then, they didn't tell us anything about, we've already purchased it, we already got the water, we just want you to give us the money to pay us back for purchasing the water. That's not how it was presented. It was United needs $3 million to take advantage of this one-time opportunity. We gave them the money, and United didn't use it to buy the state water. And now I'm hearing, well, you got the water in some other way, so what do you care? I care a lot, because I wouldn't have voted to give United $3 million if they had the water already, or if they had $3 million to buy the water themselves. I only did it because it was presented as a one-time opportunity and United didn't have the funding. Not one mention of United already has purchased this money, and we're not going to actually use the money to buy the state water. That's a pretty non-transparent approach to this board on something. When we work on urgency, trust has to be a big part of it. You have to trust that you're really getting a straight scoop. And I certainly don't feel like we have that at this point in time.
Mr. West. I was an alternate sitting in the audience on the night of this. I have not discussed this with Mr. Bennett, but when I read the story on the front page of today's Star, I was very surprised with what I read. And at least coming from my city, they call those bait and switch. And I sure as hell hope that's not what happened. But I agree totally with what Mr. Bennett has said. It was, as I sat in the audience, it was like a very urgent need. And then reading the article in the newspaper, if it's factual, it's a totally different story. Thank you.
Any other board comments? Moving on to the consent agenda, unless a board member has any questions or wishes to make a change.
We have somebody that came up to speak here. Does he want to
Oh,
speak?
Bob, did you have a public comment?
Yes, Bob Seemack with United Water. The once-in-a-lifetime opportunity was as a result of the heavy rains that we had, and all the riverbeds were saturated, so that our efficiency of bringing water into the Oxnard Basin were vastly improved. We normally release that water in the fall, but discussions entered between United and GMA that if we released it in the summer, we would get the maximum benefit to the Oxnard subbasin. That was the rationale. And Director West is correct. There is a high potential for more Article 21 water being available early next year, and it's climatically driven. If we have an early rain, it'll be earlier. If it's a later rain, it'll be later. But all the folks that I've talked to, state water contractors, say that they're banking on getting that water. So if that water does become available, if we did not do this transaction or the grant that Fox Canyon gave us, we would not have the ability to buy any more of that Article 21 water. So that's, it was just, there was the hydrological, the geological conditions were perfect to maximize the deliveries at the Freeman diversion. Otherwise, I think we would have probably seen most of that water seep into the upper basins.
And if the Article 21 water doesn't come available in the fall, you'll just be, you just will have done an early release. Is that correct?
No, sorry. If the article, well, we'll need a place to put the Article 21 water, and that is Lake Piru.
If you get it.
And that, that's one of the reasons why we bought Article 21 water, because we had a place to put it. We were one of 5 or 6 contractors that made it out of 26 contractors to take advantage of Article 21 water because we had a place to put it. By the way, over 50,000 acre-feet of water flowed into the ocean because people did not take advantage of that. So I'll call it an opportunistic approach. When there's water available, we want to buy as much as we can. And through that $3 million grant, we were able to have the funds now to take advantage of any future Article 21. And there's other waters available, carryover water, which is...
This is incredible. You're confirming exactly this. So That's not how you presented it to us. That's not how it was presented us at the time, that you had already purchased the water. You wanted us to, it was urgent to know that nobody's arguing when, we always want you to release the water when it's best. If things are really wet, release the water, right? Then you have this potential reservoir, and you could come to us, and I would have been happy to have a conversation about, all right, you already released that, now you've got room in the lake, and now there might be some Article 21 water available, and we could have a calmer, more rational conversation about both where do we come up with the $3 million and do we actually fund it back? We short-circuited all of those conversations because it was urgent. They had a deadline. You had to purchase the water within a few days. You didn't even purchase the water within a few days. You didn't purchase the water at all, and it sounds like you had no intention of purchasing the water. That is complete misrepresentation of a very important issue to this board. And we made a rapid-fire decision on one point. The reason we made it rapid-fire, because the state said you had to decide within days to purchase the water. And we didn't have to decide within days. You had already purchased the water. You could release the water. You were...
But we would not have released it until November, which means that none of that water or very little of that water would have made down at the Oxnard Plain.
And,
So we took advantage of the saturated conditions.
and did
in
you
the
tell
river.
us that?
I thought it was clear. I mean, I guess I have to review the tapes. I don't recall.
Review the tape. It was to purchase the water. It
I
wasn't...
specifically asked, was there continuity from Lake Piru to the Freeman diversion in order to allow that water to arrive?
Absolutely. You talked about how valuable it would be to release the water, or you talked about how valuable it would be to purchase the water so it could be released right then while we had that good condition. It wasn't this other side of this, completely misrepresented in terms of that. Yes, you asked the question, is there this link? Yes, right? But that link was that's why we should purchase the water right then. Your decision whether you want to release the water then or release it in November, I assume you're going to release the water whenever the best time is. But you should be straight up with us. Instead, you used the fact that the state had a deadline for the purchase of the water within days to force an urgency decision on our part. And there was no need for that urgency decision.
I don't recall that statement being made that there was a sense of urgency in purchasing the water. I think it was a statement that if we released the water, we would maximize the diversion.
You purchased the water.
The basin.
If you purchase the water, all right? So, well, we have a nice tape of that, and we'll be able to review that.
Thank you, Bob. Now, moving on to the consent agenda. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda or a request for any changes?
I abstained because I wasn't.
There are only,
Accept the consent agenda.
is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Right, moving on then to the regular agenda, item number 3, GSP planning update.
Good afternoon, Chair West, members of the board. For the record, Kim Loeb, Fox Canyon staff. And here we are at long last, after a very very involved process to get where we are today, to have draft groundwater sustainability plans available for review and consideration by your board of a public comment period. And we think it's probably makes sense to just take a brief review of how we got to where we are now. Your board authorized preparing the groundwater sustainability plans for the Las Posas Valley Basin, the Oxnard Subbasin, and the Pleasant Valley Basin back in 2015. Your board appointed a technical advisory committee or group, TAG, and had a charter with the TAG to develop a sustainable yield. And the board conducted extensive public engagement during the GSP development, significantly exceeding Sigma requirements. And this has been a long process by everyone, including your board, the stakeholders, the TAG, our consultant Dudek, and staff. We started, as you may recall, with a plan to develop the GSPs on the existing, the data available and reports available in a short period of time. During that process, United and Cayugas got far along and ultimately completed development of their numerical groundwater flow models. And largely based on the recommendations of your TAG, that model, or those models were integrated into the GSP process to improve the GSP, but of course that delayed the process out. TAG, Dudek, and agency staff had the opportunity to review and comment on both the United and Cayugas' models, and Dudek and Stafford folks conducted peer reviews and quantitative uncertainty models or analyses on both models. For the Cayugas model, the quantitative uncertainty analysis was just recently completed and will be coming out either later this week or first thing next week. And then the agency entered into contracts with United and Cayugas to model the agency develop future sustainable groundwater management scenarios for the GSPs. In terms of public meetings and engagement, your board's held 37 board meetings where the GSPs or aspects of the GSPs have been discussed. The TAG has held 35 public meetings. These are public and are well attended by stakeholders as well, talking about the technical aspects to help make these as good a GSPs as we can make them. And I'd like to especially call out and thank our TAG members, including Brian Bondi and Terry Foreman, who I saw in the audience today, Curtis Hopkins, Dan Detmer, and before him, Tony Morgan, Sally Liu, Steve Bachman, and Jim Otusa. 6 public workshops were held, all but one of them in the evening for stakeholders to attend. Monthly GSP email newsletters have been sent out to keep people abreast of the developments. Your board took the extraordinary step of releasing a preliminary draft GSP to really encourage stakeholder input into the process to inform the development of the rest of the or to finalize the development of the draft GSP. Again, not something considered by Sigma, and you opened up a 90-day public comment process where we received 28 comments, letters, and which we brought to your board and discussed and got input on in terms of the themes raised, and they serve to improve and the development of these revised drafts. Also in response to stakeholder comments and concerns, hydrographs and maps of measurable minimum thresholds and measurable objectives and historic water levels were developed and distributed to your board and to stakeholders, and Dudek held a stakeholder workshop on the sustainable yield, MT and MOs, to engage the public and stakeholders and get more feedback to continue completing these revised draft GSPs. So these are big efforts. This is the Oxnard. This is what it looks like bound without the appendices, which are on DVD in the back. And these are now available on the GMA website for download as of last Tuesday. And what these GSPs have in them is a detailed description of the basin hydrogeology and the aquifers within the basin, water budget and sustainable yield, both historic and looking into the future, sustainable management criteria, minimum thresholds, measurable objectives, monitoring networks, and data gaps. The gaps that where we would like to have had more data. These are generally facility deficiencies. We have to rely extensively on existing extraction wells and their location and screen intervals may not be as exactly where we would like to have them to get the most information. And so then there's a potential improvements to move when we move forward for improving our data. It also includes projects and management actions, and includes the projects that your board approved including in here. They went through an extensive operations committee and tag process to develop those projects for review and inclusion. And then, of course, the appendices containing comprehensive water elevation and water quality hydrographs, as well as lots of other information that are compiled there and available. The one, as I mentioned, the quantitative uncertainty analysis for the Cayugas model was not quite complete. The write-up for that was not quite complete on the publish of this, and when it's released, it'll be added to the appendix to that GSP for review, which will either be later this week or first thing next week. Oh, and we'll have a tag meeting next week on Thursday for them to review that quantitative uncertainty analysis there. There was a peer review up front, but just the quantitative analysis was write-up was completed now. And then importantly, there's our executive summaries in each GSP, extensive executive summaries that summarize all of the important information. And I would encourage everyone who is a stakeholder, this is a daunting report, obviously, it's big, but if you do nothing else, read those executive summaries to understand what's in here, and that will provide you the background to then maybe dig into certain sections that are of importance to stakeholders. It's important also to remember what's not in these plans. Well, the plans include, as a management action, regulating extractions ultimately get to sustainable yield in the basins in 20 years. These plans do not have a prescription for what that new allocation system should look like. That's on a parallel track, and your board's been involved in that effort for some time, but that will be a management action to implement the GSP, but not included in the GSP, the details of that, which, like I say, is coming along in a parallel path. And then, of course, it's important to recognize these GSPs are plans. It says so right in the name. It's a plan. It's a plan to move forward. Sigma specifically calls out the need for adaptive management and reviewing the plans and the conditions that were in view when the plan was developed, and in fact requires that the plan be reviewed and your board consider the review and any changes that might need to be made to the plan, at least on a minimum 5-year basis. But your board can decide to do that more frequently if before 5 years, if there's some significant development that your board decides warrants a plan amendment or update. So here are the tasks that need to be completed to finish development development of the final GSP for consideration of your board adopting. So based on your board's past direction to us, we're requesting your board open a 60-day public comment period. Again, your board's process, not required through Sigma to have the public comment process. Your board has worked very hard to engage the stakeholders and get that feedback. We'll provide SGMA notification to cities and the county. SGMA requires, well, we've been having open conversations. This is a specific notification that SGMA requires that we send to all cities and to the county ahead of consideration of adoption, and notifying them that they have 30 days to contact us if they want a consultation to specifically discuss the GSP. So those will be going out consistent with SGMA. We're holding, DUDEC and staff will be holding 2 GSP workshops in the evening. The first one will be Wednesday, July 21st at 6 p.m.
You mean August?
August, oh, shoot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oops.
Wednesday came twice that week.
All right. Yes, they will be Wednesday and Thursday, August. Thank you for that correction, Chair West. Here in this building, this room, on Wednesday for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basins, and the following evening at the Camarillo City Hall for the Las Posas Basin. We'll receive comments on those. And those workshops, the way they'll work is DUDEC will provide an overview of what's in the GSPs, focusing in on the sustainable yield estimates and the sustainability indicators and the minimum thresholds and measurable objectives, and allowing ample time for question and answer with the DUDEC team and with staff there to hopefully answer those questions and provide more background so people can submit their comments if they'd like on the GSP. And we'll receive those. We'll be setting up, I believe we'll go live tomorrow, an online form that makes it very simple for comments to be received. You can either write short comments in there or attach the documents, and we can collect them easily that way. Of course, they can always mail them to us. And then we would come back to your board. We compile and address those comments and come back to your board tentatively on November 8th, special board meeting, to discuss the comments and get your board's feedback on the issues raised in the comments, so that we can work with our DUDEC team to complete development of the final GSPs, and then come back to your board on December 13th for a special board meeting to consider adoption. And so this is what the schedule looks like in a Gantt chart. And so, see if I can get this pointer to behave. There it is. So here is today, of course, providing your board opens the public comment period. It'll run through September 23rd. Here are the 2 workshops in August. And then DUDEC and staff will be reviewing those comments as they come in, and then pulling them together and starting work on finalizing the GSP and coming to your board on the 8th of November, discuss those comments, and then planned completion available for review of the GSPs on November 25th, and then your board special meeting on December 13th for consideration of adoption. Providing your board adopts the GSPs on the 13th, then they would be submitted to DWR the week of the 16th of December. And of course, January 31st is the due date for the Oxnard and Pleasant Valley Basin GSPs. They have to be submitted to DWR by then. And so we have just a short period of a few weeks over the holidays, the Christmas and New Year holidays, to address any contingency there might be. So that concludes my prepared comments, and at this point, we would recommend that after today, at this item, we'd recommend that your board receive these GSPs and open the public comment period. We're here for any questions your board might have at this time. We do have the Dudek project manager here as well to answer any questions should your board have any.
Thank you, Kim. First, not so much a question, I don't want to miss the opportunity. We've been doing this for 4 years. I know when we started this process in the middle of 2015, there was a lot of discussion and anguish over the prospect of doing it within 12 months. My first recollection when I think of the beginning of this process is I had a full head of dark hair. And that ship has long since sailed. It's been a long process. We're not at the finish line yet. We're a lot closer now to the end than the beginning. And again, I don't want to miss the opportunity to thank staff, Dudek, and the TAG, Callegas and United and all the stakeholders that participated. I've been, for the last week, working my way through these volumes. The product that we have today is a far different product than we had when the drafts were published 2 years ago, and it's a far better product than we would have had without all of your participation. I can thank you all. Please dive into those documents. Let us hear, your thoughts and ideas, remembering, as Kim mentioned, A, it's a plan, and B, the good news is we're almost done with this version. The bad news is this version's never going to end because it's going to get changed over and over again on a regular basis. And more importantly, just the same way the product has improved over the last 2 years, I have every expectation that as data becomes available and experience broadens, the product will continue to improve in the years ahead. Thank you. Any other comments from the board before we turn it over to the public? Thank you, Kim. Ladies and gentlemen, anyone have any questions or comments at this time on this subject?
We're going to have an opportunity to speak later on this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Bob Seemack with United Water. Usually there's a slew of public comments at these meetings. I guess I'm the only one up here that wants to talk about the GSP to now, but I don't want to. I sent a letter to Kim, and the purpose of the letter was really to provide suggestions to added value as this thing goes to the public process. It does not imply that United has thoroughly reviewed the 500-plus pages of the documents, but just to give the board and the public some insight and some initial thoughts.
It's okay. We're used to getting comments from people who haven't read the work product, but go right ahead, Bob.
That being said,
I'm just teasing.
So, 4 comments, and these are really aimed at the auction art and the PV. We're not involved in Las Posas GSP. It states that the overdraft is $30,000 in the plain, and the saltwater intrusion is $9,700. It sort of implies that there's an overdraft of 30,000 acre feet, and it's really more of a case of where the water is pumped. It's pumped in less than optimal areas, and it sort of leads to the conclusion that we should really look at conjunctive use to try to make up that 30,000 acre foot deficit. The second point is that the 2 GSPs list a total of 6 projects that would provide new water. There are other projects out there, including brackish water, and we have a plan for some pipeline work, et cetera, that would also help alleviate the condition. So just wanted to point that out. The third point is that the GSA currently states that the saltwater intrusion was largely been halted in the upper aquifer, and that most of the issues are with the lower aquifer. But we shouldn't, I guess, be alarmist. The hydrology is very complex, and we shouldn't make decisions on ramp down based upon saltwater intrusion. It's moving at a relatively slow and controlled rate. It's still an issue. We need to deal with it, but we shouldn't, I guess, lack of a better term, panic that we have saltwater intrusion. And the fourth point is that we talk about saltwater intrusion as the driver for development of sustainability criteria, but there are other criteria that, and they may be included in the body of the report, but in the executive summary, those were not discussed, and I think it would be a good opportunity to at least discuss how this plan affects the other 6 criteria. So that are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Thank you, Gene.
Anyone else? All right. Hearing none, any further discussion or comments from the board on this item? Well, you can turn it off. Thanks.
Again, I'm the alternate here today for Ms. Craven, but in reading this document with respect to the Oxnard and the Pleasant Valley, I don't have any particular concern with receiving the 3 draft GSPs opening a 60-day public comment period as staff recommends. I can't say whether I support everything in each of these GSPs, so I'm not going to comment on details of the document quite yet. I do think, however, that our board needs to take up a fairly critical issue raised in the 3 GSPs, but especially in the Oxnard Pleasant Valley Basin, which is that we need to decide how conservative we're going to be setting sustainable yields. Sustainable yield in the Oxnard Basin GSP is anywhere from 29,400 acre-feet to 48,600 acre-feet per year. Sustainable yield in the Pleasant Valley Basin GSP is anywhere from 10,600 acre-feet to 12,600 acre-feet per year. If you combine the 2 basins because they are connected, sustainable yield is anywhere from 40,000 to 61,200 acre-feet per year. That's a huge range. Repeat, it's a huge range. I think before we destabilize the entire region, before we cause severe harm to our economy, we need to think about where we want to set sustainable yield. We should take a conservative stance and set sustainable yield as high as we can. Set sustainable yield in the Oxnard Pleasant Valley Basin at 61,200 acre-feet per year. All along, this body, we've been assuming the number will be approximately 60,000 to 65,000 acre-feet per year. So this is in line with that expectation. If in later years we learn further research that we need to adjust sustainable yields down, we can always do that. But there is no need to create panic by setting sustainable yields very low without the research backing up those requirements. In any case, I think the board needs to take up this critical issue at an upcoming meeting. It's an important conversation. As I said, without supporting everything in the 3 draft GSF, I'm comfortable receiving them and opening a 60-day public comment period as staff recommends. Thank you.
Thank you, Bert. Any other comments from the board? And if there are none, is there a motion to receive the draft GSPs and open the 60-day comment period?
So moved. I'll second.
Okay, motion and a second. We need a roll call?
Chair West,
Yes.
Director Bennett,
Yes.
Director Aranio,
Aye.
Director Perillo,
Here, yes.
Director Borchard,
Yes.
Thank you, Kim. Moving on, actually, don't go far. Moving on to item number 4, groundwater extraction fee increases.
Good afternoon. Excuse me. Again, Chair West, members of the board, and again, for the record, Kim Loeb, Fox Canyon staff. This is a follow-up item to last month's discussion when your board adopted the 2019-2020 fiscal year budget. And just for review, the agency's extraction fees are based on an acre-foot pumping charge. The current total is $12.50 an acre-foot. It's made up of 2 different charges, but the total is $12.50. As we discussed last month during the fiscal year 2019-20 budget, this assuming a basin or FCGMA-wide pumping that's consistent with the last couple of years of about 125,000 acre-feet of extractions. That would provide revenue of about $1.5 million for the operating fund and that would put the operating fund in a about $560,000 deficit. An increase of $4.50 would balance the operations fund for a total of 70. Your board had some discussion among your members about possibly considering a higher increase. So we've come back to your board with this table. It's the same table that's in your agenda packet. And what we're looking at here is the total extraction fee, the current one right here, the $17 that was talked about at the last month's board meeting, and then scenarios with $20,000 and $25,000, and the revenue that would be generated for the operating fund or account in each of those scenarios, assuming this pumping, and then the projected operating fund ending balances in the fiscal year 2019-20, and then the planning year budgets of 2020, 21 and 21-22 under each of those scenarios. And this presumes revenue and ending budgets starting on July 1 of this fiscal year. Implementation later would, of course, reduce that amount proportionately. We also wanted to discuss with your board the effective date. Really, it needs to be rolled into effect should your board decide to move forward, and that's not before you today. We'll come back as your board, should your board so direct. Either starting with this current reporting period, July 1st, 2019 for municipal, industrial, and domestic, and then August 1 starts the period for agriculture. And there is precedent for a slightly retroactive increase. It was done the last time your board adopted a fee increase in early part of 2016, I believe it was. Or alternatively, your board could consider implementing on January 1st, which is the start of the reporting period for all reporters. And so that's really the end of my comments. We recommend that your board provide direction regarding the amount and the effective date. Apparently, we need that recommendation twice. And then return, if so directed, we'll return to your board with a resolution for a fee increase at the fee your board directs, and with the implementation date that your board so directs. And so just to tee off any discussion you may wish to have, we'll move back to this table.
And just so that the board's aware, I think we discussed at the last meeting when Director Craven was here that it was the recommendation of the fiscal committee that we go to the $17 extraction fee rate to balance the budget and balance the next couple of budgets to the extent that we can. We didn't specifically discuss the implementation date, but that meeting was some while ago. I don't think we anticipated having the discussions in July. We thought we might be done by then.
Chair West, one thing I forgot to mention, if I can, I talk about this in the staff report. It should be, everyone should keep in mind that these fees can fund operations and studies, but until we adopt the GSPs, we can't raise fees and directly participate in infrastructure and projects, water supply projects.
Well, these numbers were tied to the budget, and none of those items were in the budget.
That's correct. One of the things that your board, in fact, I think it was you, Chair West, and members of the board agreed that there were some in 2021 and 21-22, staff made some sort of placeholder assumptions for what costs might be for both implementation of the GSP and also for development of a new data management system or purchasing of one of $250,000 a year. You and other board members spoke to maybe that wasn't sufficient.
I do recall that discussion. I still feel that way. Any questions or comments from the board before we ask public input?
I have a few comments. One, unlike you, Director Russ, I haven't finished all three of these.
I haven't finished. No, 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 no.
But in my reading of it, I note that there are a number of places where we've identified that the agency would be far better off if we have more monitoring wells out there. And more monitoring wells would give us better data, allow us to have more certainty in terms of decision-making, overall be healthy. And I think the arguments made for them were sound in here, with the idea that we have things like putting in more monitoring wells, et cetera. I would suggest that slightly higher fee to going to the $20 may make sense, because for us to be building up more substantial reserves, we will have significant expenses. We're going to have legal expenses running this agency. We know there are lots of lawsuits out there. We're going to have implementation expenses, and this isn't sustainability. This isn't the replacement fee. That's separate. But I think it would be prudent for us at this point in time. I think we've demonstrated that we're not taking the money and using it to build some empire of a staff. In fact, we just transferred $3 million of our reserves, from our reserves. We just put it in the bank account of United, all right? It's become part of their reserves, right? They're not spending it. And so we have not been doing what some people were fearful of, which is that we were just going to, build some big staff. So I think we've been prudent with it. I think it makes sense, but it'd be better for us to be at the $20 level, or I'd like to throw that out there for discussion purposes and people's reactions and board member reactions and stuff. So, thank you.
Well, I certainly agree with the notion that the cost of implementation of the GSPs and the cost of further development of the data that we need to improve the GSPs far exceeds the amounts that have been put in the budgets for the next couple of years. And it may be a smart move to start preloading that funding now, rather than wait until we're 3 years into this process and have millions of dollars of bills we can't afford.
And if there is significant potential conflict that's going to come up, it just is harder to then also be saying, now we've also got to increase fees because we don't have the money to deal with that. Better to be prudently prepared is what I would suggest. And while I recognize every dollar is important, it seems like a modest increase relative to the gain for the agency, right? And I realize that every dollar is important to everybody.
Robert?
My personal feelings on this one and whereabouts we're at is that our rates should absolutely match what our operating costs are. Relying upon reserves or one-time monies, such as we have in the past, in order to balance a budget, I don't agree with. The other hand here, we're asking for a 25% rate increase, and I think that's fairly substantive at this point in time. I know also that we have a fairly large reserve that may not be in the operating fund, but we do keep $1 million in contingency monies that is stashed away that we don't see on this balance sheet either, that we can access. So with that, my personal feelings are that we should stay at the 17 for this. We can come back and visit that again and raise it as needed when the projects are better identified. The bigger issue that I have with it is, now that we have been asked what is going to be our timing for this and what the effectiveness is that we've got a variety of different dates that are going on in this organization that are leading to some confusion. Last month, M&I had to do their meter recordings. This month it's going to be the ag account, and we didn't get noticing out properly on that. We're also looking at the GSPs that we're going to be switching to a water year, October 1st. Now we're being asked here about when does this funding go into place as far as a January 1st. Our dates are kind of like all over the place. And with public agencies or even water companies, we like to have some consistency in knowing what our timeline is, instead of having something jump up in the middle of the year and try and keep track of what the funding is. So I don't know that we can address it or consider it at this point in time, but down the road here, going forward, I myself would like to see how we get our dates all coordinated, so everyone knows what's going on every 6 months, and we don't have this split between ag and M&I, or when our budgets need to have a certain amount of dollars in place in order to pay for our extraction fees.
Any other board comments?
I think my fellow directors know where I stand on raising rates, but I'm not going to get in the way of the modest rate fee and continuing, in particular, since I was one of the ones that thought it was a great idea that we gave United some money to buy some water. And I still think that was a great idea, and it's still my understanding that we're going to get that water. If we don't see that water, I, as you, would be very upset with that. My take on the thing is we had to make room in the storage in the lake to put the water that we were buying. So whether it got purchased now or whether it gets purchased in the fall, to me, it doesn't matter, as long as it gets purchased. This $17 rate looks to balance the budget, as it were. We do carry large reserves. We should always keep that in mind. And we should also keep in mind that historically this agency has forecasted shortfalls that we've never seen. And though it doesn't make sense to fall off the cliff before we fix the problem, I think we also have to be cognizant not to be going out too far in front. So I would support the 17, but no further.
And just, I guess, just a word of caution with respect to whatever we decide to do. First, I think given the historic work of this agency, the reserves are adequate. They're adequate. They're not good, they're adequate. Given the changed work of this agency under SGMA, the reserves are pitiful and won't accomplish what this agency needs to accomplish in the years ahead. Understanding that, my only concern is if we stick with a minimalist rate increase now, we need to be prepared to have this same conversation 10 months from now. Because I think 10 months from now, when we're looking at a 2021 budget, and not merely the projections that we have today, but we see the actual implementation costs on the near term that we're likely to see when that budget gets published, I think we're going to be looking at another shortfall. But if we're prepared to have that discussion again, or this discussion again, then maybe the $17 is adequate. If we want to really prepare for what we know is coming, we need to consider something broader than that.
Chair West,
Yes.
if it would be a no, if I do have the budget, it's not in here, but I have Director Romeo, I say this might be helpful. I have those numbers, what the reserves are this year, and what we're up against as far as potential expenditures. So AMI is an open thing, groundwater purchases, are an open thing, and of course, the mitigation open thing. And you're working with do you need this, Kim? Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. So you're working, right now, you're working with about 800 in the GEMS fund that's specifically for nothing but litigation. And you have about 1.9 for contingency. So water purchases, any AMI stuff that your board decides to do, and anything else that comes up in the interim. If you stay with the 17, that's it.
Okay, that's helpful, thank you. Any other, just for,
Chair West, I'm reading the agenda, and it says the recommendation is a discuss. I didn't say that we're taking action. It says discuss.
correct.
Looking at the PowerPoint, if we look at the third year, if we go at the 17, we have $53,000. That's enough to buy a pickup truck today. It doesn't seem like it's enough of a reserve to do anything. And granted, I'm an alternate on this board, but I'll speak from where I sit.
I just want to point out, although what you're saying would support my position, I just want to point out that's the operating fund ending balance.
Correct.
That's not the reserves.
Right. But that's what you would have left at the end of the year in 2022, correct?
In the operating fund.
In the
fund,
operating
okay.
fund, not, okay.
So I'm just trying to equate 53,000, what do we can get for 53,000? It's more than a T-bone steak, but it's not a really fancy truck today. With respect to the reserves, coming from a city that can face situations where you go through reserves like water,
No pun intended.
pun intended, I do believe that the rates have to go higher, higher than the 17. But I also come from a city where they're very frugal. The current administration is extremely frugal, and they want to see everything in a budget, everything line item. They want to make sure that the numbers they're being presented are accurate. We've had issues in our city. We've had issues with the county. We've had issues in the newspaper. My meeting yesterday, we want to make sure that the numbers are accurate before we jump off up here in the dark. The number of full-time employees, administrative costs, utilities, how everything is shared, how these numbers come up with. The idea of banking a fund and building up a preloading a fund, I totally agree with that. There's nothing like coming up short and walking around with your hands out and your pockets pulled out. You got nothing to give. And your residents or the people that we represent are asking for stuff, and you don't have it. Your kids, example, your kids want something for Christmas and you don't have the money to give it to them. So that's a tough one to take. But to approve the higher number, when I first looked at this, I thought the 25 and you'd build up to $3 million, that would be, you'd have a reserve. And all of a sudden I'm looking like, wait a minute, what am I doing? What do I verify these numbers? And I've asked staff to get us the numbers, and at least the people that I represent these cities, some have asked questions the same that I'm asking today. But I do believe that the rates need to go up higher than the 17, but I understand this is a discussion. It's not a vote. That's my opinion. The monitoring wells and the items that are addressed in this item, specifically the one at Oxnard that I'm heavily involved with, I've heard at this board, the price of wells, even if we took the $20 rate and it was an operating fee, or $1 million is not going to go very far. Now, if you get into the reserves and you start undermining the reserves, I don't know what the policy on this board is, a percent of reserves you have to keep. But working in a city, and a much larger city than us, they have 8%, some 9%. LA's thrilled at it, they got 8%. I don't know what the policy is here. But when you start robbing the seed corn, you got a problem. I'd rather build up than operate on bare bones. I may be considered a liberal in some areas, but I am a conservative. I come from a family background in farming, and they don't waste money. But running around and spendthrift, I don't think that's a wise move. Those are my opinions.
Any other comments from the board before we ask for public comment?
Just one more quickly. Another thing that has stuck out to me on our spreadsheets is we're looking at a new data management program to do a better job of managing and reconciling all the data that we're supposed to be in charge of. And I recall going through this process back when Mike Kelly was on the board. And one of the questions that he hammered on that I thought was an important thought was that that system that we built then be upgradable and transportable. And it appears that it's not upgradable since we're now being asked to pay for a new one. But I still think the transportable idea is important. It's not really part of this conversation. It's part of just a broader budget discussion, but I think we're looking at a couple $100,000 again for another data management system. And I would just encourage staff that we need to get it right this time, because it seems like we didn't quite get it right last time. There's some issues of reconciling, and I've understood from some of our stakeholders that when they get into the data, some of it doesn't match up. So I'm not saying we shouldn't pay for it. I'm just saying let's make sure that we make this thing upgradable, transportable, and something that we don't have to just keep doing every couple of 5 years.
So on that note, if I may, it is both of those things, but it will cost, because of the change in the system that your board is discussing and what we presume to be the outcome, it's cheaper to build it anew than to try and Rube Goldberg something onto it. So you can take it away any way, any day you want. So both those goals have been met. Second thing is, I think, thinking that this new one is only going to be 200,000 is really optimistic. I think it's going to be a lot more expensive than that, my experience. And I know that you in the private sector look at that and say that seems unreasonable, but wait until, I mean, the water software that operates a number of these water agencies, just talk to them, ask them how much it costs off the shelf. And then there are all sorts of support costs and so forth. So, I mean, you're still getting a bargain, but we need, I don't even, at 200,000 may be an order of magnitude off. Just to start planting the seeds.
I appreciate your explanation. Yeah, I'm stunned to hear that, but you're not surprised.
Fraction of what the rest of
Before we turn it over, ask the public comment, just one other observation. Our choices here aren't unitary. If we felt that the $17 rate was adequate for the 2019-20 budget, but knowing what we're looking for in advance of that, we wanted, the $17 rate for the next year, going to 20 a year from now, we could certainly direct staff to do something like that. We wouldn't have to just choose a fixed amount now going forward. So just, I guess with that observation, thank you, Kim. Let me ask any members of the public who wish to be heard on this item to come forward. All right, seeing and hearing that. All right, well, it's got to move more quickly than that. Come ahead.
Just a quick question. Are these fees subject to Prop 218?
These fees are not. These fees are not. These are basically administrative fees. These are not subject to 218.
Thank you.
It's Prop 26.
This isn't a tax. Anyone else? All right. And back to the board. Any further discussions or motions? We're not taking an action. We need to give direction to staff.
In the spirit of compromise, I appreciate what you just suggested about $20 a year from now. So I'd like to just try this as a motion, which would be we direct staff to come back with an action item that would call for a $17 extraction fee next year and a $20 extraction fee for the year after that.
And I guess the $17 to be effective July 1, 2019, the 20, July 1, 2020. Is that right?
That's correct.
Any discussion? Yes?
Yeah, my initial discussion, I love the idea. I think it's pretty neat. I don't think 20 is going to be enough. I totally acknowledge going forward a year from now, this landscape's going to look different. We're going to need some more funds going forward. And that's why I was taking a cautious approach now with what we know, what we think we can be, based upon the fact that 125,000 acre feet of extraction. We all know that if we have a wet winter, that 125,000 acre feet is going to crater and probably come down to 100,000. And that's going to have a bigger impact on this budget than anything staff's going to do between now and next year. So I like the idea and I'm willing to work with you, but I'm not sold that 20 is going to be enough.
Well,
I think we may have to go higher than that next year.
I hope you're wrong. I wouldn't be surprised if you're not. But in keeping with, I think Bert's point is a good one. At this point, we really can't quantify what that need is.
Right.
And I think it's unfair to put that burden on the backs of the stakeholders until we can. I think we're very confident that at 17 and 20, we know that need exists and that we can define and justify. Even if we do this, that doesn't mean we can't come back next year when the need is more apparent and better defined and have this discussion again. So.
And I might point out, in fact, if in fact you're correct and we're going to need a more substantial increase than $20 in 2020, it's going to be easier to do that if we've already committed to being at $20. Sure. But if you think it's going to be more, then by not taking this action, we're simply saying the fee is $17 until we decide to do something. And if the board did nothing, we'd be stuck at $17, or if the board was divided or whatever. So I think that it doesn't keep us from doing more, but it does give us what I think it sounds like at least a number of us think is at least prudent for 2020 year as well as 2019.
The other thing I wanted to respond to was the statement that was brought up about monitoring wells, and the need for monitoring wells in order to fill data gaps that we have out there. I would see monitoring wells a response to the GSP and would be coming out of the replenishment monies that are going to be set aside for that. That's a development that isn't so much having to do with staff and the operation of this. That's a result of the GSPs going forward and raise the money out of that aspect of it.
I would strongly disagree with you on that. Monitoring wells give us the data we need to monitor the information. The replenishment fee, I'm afraid if we use the replenishment fee for monitoring wells, you're going to have a lot of people saying, hey, that sounds like administration and that sounds like that. I want my replenishment fee to be dollar for dollar. I give you money and you turn around and turn that into water. That's how I think the replenishment fee should be. So I strongly disagree with that view. I think monitoring wells is going to need to come out of operating revenue.
Okay.
Any other comments or questions before we?
You mentioned retroactive July 1st of 2019. Can you make it retroactive?
Yes.
You can.
So there's a motion that we direct staff, as Director Bennett mentioned. Is there a second to that motion?
I'll second it.
Okay. I guess it's just direction. I don't think we need a roll call for that. But let me just, all in favor of directing staff as per the motion?
Yes.
No.
No? Okay. That's the direction. Thank you.
I just want to point out, I appreciate Director Borchardt's comments about the $3 million and that we are in agreement. I don't think it's a bad idea as long as they actually go down and purchase the state water this fall. If they don't, then I think we're both saying that's the problem. So
Correct.
We're not in disagreement there.
And just to finalize on this last note here, I didn't really get a chance to discuss again, but I don't like the idea of the agency locking itself into rate increases, particularly when we are in a situation of unknowns. I'd be willing to go with that $17, but stepping us into another advance next year and even other advances, let's see what comes. Because our history has shown us that time and time again, we don't spend what we think we're going to need. It may not be the case. Let's see.
All right, moving on then, the next is the item 5. Is there a motion to receive and file the executive officer's report?
So moved.
Second? All in favor? Aye, all right. We are going to recess the public portion of this meeting and go into closed session to return once that's completed. Thank you. Back from closed session to report that no action was taken in closed session that needs to be reported out. With that, we're adjourned.